Towards effective legislative activities, National Assembly holds 5-day retreat for top management staff.
Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, to hold continuous voters registration by April, urges over 7.8 million registered yet voters to claim their permanent voters card to do so.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, our focus is on the challenges of mortgage financing in Nigeria.
Now, it's no longer news that there is a massive shortfall of housing in Nigeria, and experts have Kingsley actually put it at over 17 million houses. And the World Bank has actually estimated this need to cost about 59.5 trillion naira if we would breach this gap.
Well, that's right. Now, the truth, Rhoda, is that for far too long, housing policies, programs, and delivery by successive governments have failed to meet the expectations of many citizens, particularly the low and medium income earners who desire to have homes of their own, or rather houses of their own.
And the truth is the majority of Nigerians, of course, who are low-income earners live in ramshackle houses, and these environments we actually call urban slums.
That's right. The conditions are pretty squalid. But conversely, you find a situation where in highbrow areas of large cities such as Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Enugu, and among others, you find exotic homes built by estate developers who charge pretty exorbitant rent or offer such houses for sale at cutthroat prices. And it's also estimated that quite a number of mansions have not been occupied for several years in some of these cities, particularly Abuja, just because the developers are asking for amounts that are right
outrageous
above the roof.
And of course, the research has also shown that these estate developers who are in housing businesses to maximize profits are major beneficiaries of the mortgage financing program of government.
Well, the government, no doubt, has been concerned over the years with regard to bridging the housing deficit and therefore providing decent accommodation for Nigerians. And certainly that was the rationale for the establishment of the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, which, of course, subsequently, we also saw the National Housing Fund, which was launched in the 90s.
And to fulfill its mandate, the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria evolved a contributory savings scheme for workers who contribute 2.5% of their basic salary to be used for mortgage loans at concessionary terms for the purchase, building, expansion, or renovation of their houses.
And just 3 years ago, that was in 2014, the federal government established the Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company, all with the aim of deepening the Nigerian mortgage market and ultimately seek to make housing more affordable and available to low and medium income earners at pretty low interest rate.
However, the reality today is that the existing mortgage financing only caters for financial institutions and developers who annex available mortgage resources in building homes of speculative value rather than the reality that we have on ground.
Well, what we know is that in countries where housing is conceived as a right of citizens, we find a situation where access to housing is normally secured through mortgage facilities. And of course, citizens who are eligible have access to these facilities either through their banks or through mortgage institutions by which they pay instrumentally for the homes.
And you know that in Nigeria, of course, getting a mortgage is almost is a tall dream. For instance, it's over 20 years after the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria was established, the sole secondary mortgage institution in the country, which is to support primary mortgage markets with liquidity and financial capacity, but it says it's hindered by poor funding.
Well, the Federal Mortgage Bank has, according to some data that we have, disbursed a little over 100 billion naira and delivered some 56,000 houses, which observers say is just a drop in the ocean when compared to the housing deficit, which of course runs into several millions for the 170 million or so Nigerians who are living.
To further widen the base of affordable housing to Nigeria's low-income earners, the Buhari administration launched the Federal Integrated Staff Housing Scheme, FISH. Of course, the figures from the Office of the Head of Service of the Federation indicates that about 16,000 out of the 23,000 federal civil servants who participated in the mass housing scheme will benefit from its first phase.
Now, from interactions with some of the beneficiaries, securing mortgage for the houses has also been a challenge, while the majority of those, who are unable to raise the mandatory initial 10% down payment on the houses, indicate how big the issue is for some of the low and medium income earners.
And that's if it's 10%. For some, it's about 20%.
That's what we hear.
You have to put that. But so the question this morning is, will the mortgage in Nigeria work? Why has it been difficult for low-income, working-class Nigerians to obtain mortgage to buy or build houses? And if Nigeria must solve the over 17 million housing deficit, what appropriate housing financing measures must be put in place? Of course, those are the questions we shall attempt to provide this morning with our guest on Good Morning Nigeria today. I'm Rhoda Albo, and I'm welcoming you to, of course, it's the second edition for the week. It's Tuesday.
And I'm Kingsley Osadollah. I join Rhoda in also welcoming you to this edition of the program, reaching you as always live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're Africa's largest TV network.
And in the course of the program, we shall bring to you our companion segments. That's a newspaper review. We've got business, we've got sports, foreign and entertainment news. But as you know, the news comes first. And Anne Jimeno is our guide this morning. Anne, good morning.
Good morning, Rhoda, and hello, Kingsley. Good morning. Welcome to the news. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has advised stakeholders in the education sector to evolve better teaching and learning techniques to address contemporary challenges of the society. It was while receiving a delegation of the West African Examinations Council. And Senate President Bukola Saraki says the management of the National Assembly is strategic to the efficiency of the legislature. At a retreat for senior management staff of the National Assembly in Lokoja, the Senate President reminds participants on the need to actualize the change agenda of the federal government. And Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Walter Onogen, says there is now a renewed effort to modernize the nation's judiciary through the introduction of technology. He stated this in a message to the opening of a refresher course for judges and caddies in the country.
Application of information and communication technology solutions to the administration of justice would make the system function more effectively.
The federal government has reiterated its commitment to human capacity building in the Niger Delta as part of efforts to fast-track development in that region. Special advisor to the president on Niger Delta and coordinator of the Presidential Amnesty Program, Brigadier General Paul Burrow, gave the assurance at a media chat in Abuja.
The Presidential Amnesty Office is focused on human capacity development, which ensures stability in the Niger Delta region to allow for development.
Well, the federal government is encouraging state governments to continue paying counterpart funds in order to benefit from the World Bank Fadama 3 projects. The Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Audu Obe, said this in Kano State while inaugurating the Fadama 3 project.
Why we built and procure these tractors is for the sustainability of Padama. When Padama is closed, the farmers are going to sustain these offices. That's why we procure this as a subsidized price to our farmers.
This will add to Kano's efforts to continue to be in the lead. We're very pleased with it.
An independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, is calling on more than 7.8 million registered voters yet to claim their permanent voter cards to do so as the Commission plans to hold continuous voters registration in April. At the first consultative meeting with media executives and political correspondents, INEC's chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, also stated that the use of card readers in elections has come to stay.
We are going to have 1,560 constituencies to conduct elections in. From the beginning of the year to the end of the year, it is all election. So we need to plan.
The Minister of Interior has officially presented the revised version of the Immigration Regulations 2017 to the public. The new regulation replaces the 50-year-old version, which has become obsolete.
The idea is to be able to receive them, document them, and also issue them with the international transhuman certificates. Now you'll be able to know and monitor, their movement from that point to where they are going, even when coming back.
Once we know who is where, we know that you are in our country, you are in our territory, we have you, we know your address. It makes things easier. It will help transnational crime to be fought effectively.
Enhancing training and retraining of staff for increased viewership and revenue generation for the Nigerian Television Authority dominated a technical discussion between the NTA management and project managers of WTS broadcast system. Adebola Brookslyn Sunday reports that the meeting was held at the corporate headquarters of the NTA in Abuja.
Our aim and objective is to make sure that NTA gets to where it is, where it should be, and that is the very top. Here in Abuja, we have News 24, we have NTA International, we have NTA Abuja. So we're starting at this point in time with this staff, of these various channels, platforms of the NTA, and eventually we are going to dovetail into the various zonal centers, and from the zonal centers we are going right down to the production center levels.
I am very optimistic because NTA is a very, very, very powerful and very big operation platform, and it has all the potential to succeed, honestly. Otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Well, that's the news for now. Rhoda and Kingsley will be back after this break.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
When Kayode Kukoyi was a year old, he contracted the polio virus, which attacked his nervous system, leading to irreversible paralysis. Now a grown man, husband and father of 3, he's struggling to make ends meet as a keke napep driver.
Every day, I risk my life for my family so that they can live better. My life is worth 2,000 naira a day.
So what's up, sweetheart? You really look like you're up to something.
I have a secret.
Okay.
I'll be going to Europe next week.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Like you have your visa, your passport, your plane ticket?
No, not that way. Some men are helping us. We pay them, they take us through the desert, and then we cross the sea into Europe.
The desert, the sea. Isn't that the route where many have died?
Yes, it is indeed a very dangerous journey. In 2016 alone, 4,900 people died while crossing the Mediterranean Sea to enter Europe. Many were Nigerians. For the very few who survived the journey, they are forced into prostitution or other crimes just to survive. Eventually, they will be arrested and deported to Nigeria. Don't be a victim. Don't go this way.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the NTA. Now let's talk business as the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria began its two-day meeting to review developments in the financial sector of the economy. Let's get more details from our business news correspondent, Joy Uzo.
The lingering issues of interest rates, cash liquidity ratio, among other economic matters, occupied discussions at the meeting. The monetary and fiscal authorities of Nigeria had met in Abuja to seek collaboration on the way out of the current economic crunch. The meeting between the Central Bank of Nigeria, Ministries of Finance, Budget and National Planning, as well as Trade and Investment, was also to harmonize various policy perspectives. Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele, said this will provide perspective for Monetary Policy Committee decisions. Talks are underway between the federal government and the International Fund for Agricultural Development on reintroduction of rural financing support program through agriculture. Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Audu Ogbe, says the initiative is aimed at eradicating hunger and poverty among rural farming communities. It was piloted in 12 states in 2010 with the Central Bank, IFAD and the Ministry of Agriculture, with over 20 billion naira injected into the project, while also creating business opportunities in rural areas to the tune of 40 billion naira in 4 years. Savings mobilized under the project among rural farmers also increased from 1.5 billion naira to 14.9 billion naira.
The Honorable Minister has indicated in the interest of contacting IFAD to see how this program can be replicated in all the 36 states of the Federation, including the FCT.
Grow the capacity of these microfinance institutions in the rural areas to be able to expand their business scope and to do more for the rural-based economy, or people in the rural-based economy.
The beneficiaries were exposed to financial literacy, savings, business plans, as well as marketing of agricultural produce. The equities market closed Monday on a positive note to sustain gaining streak, as NSE All-Share Index appreciated by 0.07% to close at 25,671.55 basis points. Let's now take a look at closing figures on the floor of the exchange. The federal government may lose a whopping 57 billion naira accruable to it from the Lagos seaports if the clearing agents made through their threats to shut down the seaports nationwide over allegations of corruption, arbitrary charges, among other issues at the ports they consider unfair to them. The agents had last week issued a 21-day ultimatum to the federal government to act or activities at the ports would be paralyzed. The agents are under the aegis of the Association of Nigeria Licensed Customs Agents and the National Association of Government-Approved Freight Forwarders. Investigation revealed that 57 billion naira is revenue accruable to the federal government through collections at the seaports by the Nigeria Customs Service on import duty, operators' charges, fees accrued to Standards Organization of Nigeria, SON, National Agency for Food, Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC, and others concerned within the 21 days period. Experts have also said the impending strike action would lead to port congestion, as cargoes will be trapped at the ports, thereby fueling inflation and scarcity of raw materials for manufacturing. With Business News, I am Joy Uzo.
Thank you very much, Joy Uzo, for that business package. Next for us is a look at the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
All right, our regular newspaper reviewer, Bayo Atoyibi, is already in the studio this morning. Bayo, good morning.
Morning, Rhoda.
Always good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good morning, Kingsley. And good morning, Nigeria.
Bayo, a pleasure to have you join us today. Let's go over quickly to the front page of Daily Sun. And the lead story, of course, has to do with the apparent suicide of a medical doctor on the Third Mainland Bridge over the weekend. So it's a continuing story. It says, with a kicker, Lagos Lagoon fatal plunge. Shocking revelation about suicide doctor. And we have 3 riders there. He attempted to kill himself 4 years ago, say neighbors. Search for body continues, and mother inconsolable, still hopeful of miracle. Details of the story can be found on pages 36 and 37 of the Daily Sun. And then you also have on the front page of New Telegraph a photograph from the scene where the incident took place at the weekend. It says, suicide, doctor's family and friends besiege Third Mainland Bridge. You can see to the left side, it says, local divers in search of the body of the medical doctor. That was yesterday. And the mother of the medical doctor who jumped into the lagoon on the Third Mainland Bridge, Lagos, yesterday. So I see the mother there, apparently in a black scarf. Those are the stories on the front page of the 2 papers with regard to the fatal plunge that occurred over the weekend. Now, other headlines on the front page of the Daily Sun, beside the nameplate of the Daily Sun, 30 killed in Zakibian massacre. And gunmen open fire on traders, residents, and destroy several buildings. Details on page 5. Nigerians facing widespread hunger. That's according to Saraki, Senate President. And Kalu urges judges to emulate U.S. colleagues. South to produce next PDP chairman. And state chairman dissociate selves from meeting and communicate. Details of the story on pages 6 and 9. Suspend Parry Club refund sharing. Colonel Umar tells Buhari. That's on page 8. And on page 42, AMCON sells Keystone Bank to local consortium. You have members of SANU and NASU and NAAT at University of Ibadan protesting their pay cut yesterday. That's the photograph there on the front page of Daily Sun.
And we have the Nigerian pilot here. The Nigerian pilot leads with its headline, and it captions it today this way. Audited accounts, only 2 political parties complied, says INEC. Only 2 political parties complied with audited accounts, says INEC. Commission is not shielding corrupt officials. That story is on page 6 of the Nigerian pilot. And the authority captions this headline this way. In fighting in presidency, El-Rufai's memo was requested by Buhari. In fighting in the presidency, El-Rufai's memo was requested by Buhari. With the rider, the president made the request in Daura in September 13, 2016. The cabal finally takes full control. And let's get back to the Nigerian pilot now, to other stories trending on the front page of the Nigerian pilot. And this one, just below the nameplate, it says Somalis are happier than Nigerians. Yesterday was World Happiness Index, Happiness Day, and that's the World Happiness Index there. Somalis are happier than Nigerians. Abacha firms ask court to affirm them as Malibu oil owners. That's on page 4, and if you come down below the lead story, it says suspended Paris Club refund to states. Suspend Paris Club refund to states, says Colonel Umar, retired. That's on page 4. Now let's go to the footer of the paper. You see there on page 4, it says Nigeria has the highest rate of sickle cell anemia. Scientists invent technology to end tomato Ebola. And Igbo students flood Abuja in solidarity with Buhari. And finally, I have reconciled with Suswem, says Governor Othum. That's on page 42 of the Nigerian panel. So, right, Brian, let's get your views on this.
Yes, let's talk about the story of the doctor who jumped into the lagoon yesterday. Indications are that 4 years ago he attempted to jump from a story building, but he was dissuaded by neighbors. And there have been several attempts he has made in the previous instances. However, it was also said that it was because of his suicide tendencies that they actually employed a driver to drive him around. However, this driver had only been employed only 3 months ago. Meanwhile, the men of Lagos State Emergency Agency and Marine Police are combined with fishermen to cover the lagoon for his body. Another woman, however, known as Emerald, was also identified, reportedly jumped from Maza Maza Bridge into the lagoon at mile 2 yesterday. However, she was lucky as there were some fishermen there who rescued her. Her unconscious body was brought aboard and they were struggling to revive her. So people with psychological situations are not able to manage it. Is apparently manifesting in this suicidal tendency. However, yesterday the Vanguard reports that a group which calls itself Global Players Initiative have barricaded the Abuja office of Amnesty International. They allege that Amnesty International has ulterior motives. They allege that they indulge in deliberately indicting the security agencies working to restore peace without condemning the heinous crime committed by Boko Haram. Spokesman for GOPRI, Melvin Eje, said the National Human Rights Commission and the Global Amnesty Watch have both condemned Amnesty International's recent report on Nigeria. They said Amnesty International should not be allowed to run Nigeria as they did with the Middle East countries with their operations.
All right, Bayo, just before we go over to the New Telegraph to take a list story, still on the shoe side and Rhoda. Oftentimes, I mean, when you read some of the posts in some of these chat forums, people try to make light of a very serious issue such as suicide. You know, people ask, why did he kill himself? He was a full XYZ. The thing, as you would get to know from psychologists and others, and even sociologists, is that a suicide is actually a scar on the living. It says, look, why did this gentleman or why did this person have to take his own life? It said life is no longer worth it, life is worthless. Why should life be worthless?
Because the living could not provide enough succor
Absolutely.
to pull him out of his psychological challenges.
Okay.
All right, we'll take the Authority newspaper now. And the Authority newspaper, above the nameplate, it says, PDP, APC can't contest an senatorial rerun. That's on page 4. And happiness index, Nigeria drops to 95th in the world. And sports, Eagles friendly Pinnick fought to roar for dropping Ode. That's on page 46. And let's go down now to the foot of the paper. Judges introduce Sharia law in Nnamdi Kanu's trial. Judges introduce Sharia law in Nnamdi Kanu's trial. All right, Bayo, let's get you.
Well, that's very strange. The 6-count charge he's facing border on treasonable felony. I can't see any Sharia issue there because Sharia usually deals with personal issues. Anyway, be that as it may,
criminal allegations.
Yes, be that as it may, 28th of this month is the day for the ruling of the current case that is going on. Meanwhile, students of Igbo Students Association in higher institutions, after holding a meeting in Oka, gathered at the Unity Fountain and demonstrated to the Presidential Villa and streets of Abuja yesterday. The students say that they must avoid, our leaders must avoid the grave mistakes of the past by not repeating the obsession of a Biafran republic. We have to extinguish the idea, be part of the change agents, and impress on our people of the sight of a bright future Nigeria offers every ethnic nationality. The group that were led by a gentleman who calls himself Igwe said that we can't continue in this manner. We take up the challenge to lead the path of our elders. We want our southeastern brothers and sisters to understand Nigeria holds a lot of promise for the Igbo nation. than the dilution of an extinct Biafran republic. This hour of realization is now. Another development is the story we took the other day. You recall Sad Zunguru Model School in Bauchi, where it was closed because students were consummating marriage in the school. Now, a committee set up has provided a report. The principal and 2 vice principals and the discipline master have all been transferred. A new principal has been appointed. 7 of the 8 students involved in the marriage saga have been expelled. The 8th girl was spared because she actually resisted the marriage. Also,
the forced marriage.
The forced marriage. Also, at the Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida University, Lapai, you recall the saga about a lecturer of English who had gone to the girls' hostel. An investigating committee have found that the lecturer and the student have been expelled, suspended from the university, and meanwhile, they are to face various disciplinary measures within the campus university.
All right, Bayo, thanks a lot for that update. Let's go over to This Day newspaper as well as The Nation. Their lead stories and the headlines for those lead stories are similar. They are both on the Parry Club. Now, This Day says, Adeosun gives conditions for further release of Parry London Club's refunds, with riders' payments subject to the current and projected cash flows of the Federation. And we also have the final refunds to be released after reconciliation with states and to publish information on refunds. Colonel Umar asks federal government to suspend payments over high consultancy fees. That's how This Day captures it. Now, for The Nation newspaper, this is the story. Let's take a look at the front page of The Nation newspaper to see its own headline on the Parry Club. $6.9 billion refund. That's the kicker. Parry Club loans records missing. And then it says, with a rider, federal government committed to refund, says Adeosun. Adeosun, of course, is Federal Minister of Finance. Gunmen killed 20 in Benue, and consortium acquires Keystone. Now, just above the nameplate of The Nation newspaper, there are other headlines. Let's take a look at them very quickly. We have there, that's Man to Die by Hunger, where it's disappeared, but it's reappeared again now. Now, why they after me by Unilorin VC? Sheriff is is one of, well, it's the PDP. It says, God will decide my fate in 2019 race. And French friend buys 95% majority shares in Swifa. And Nigeria versus Senegal, it will be on Nasi and Ikeme in camp.
Well, I'm afraid that's the much we can take this morning on our newspaper review segments in the Bio. Thank you for coming. Of course, we'll see you again tomorrow morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll take a break now. When we return, our item for discussion this morning, we're looking at mortgage in Nigeria. We'll be back in just a moment.
Money is sweet, but how sweet it is depends on a few variables like how ready you are to handle the many troubles and goodies money brings your way.
The whole of Enugu will know that show my son has arrived.
But most of all, the sweetness of money depends on if it brings you peace or not.
Not be the same Lagos where your sister picking there. Where you there?
I'd like to know your name and have your phone number if you don't mind.
Oh, my name is Jumoke. My number is 08053.
Not you. Talking to Beautiful right here.
My Pikin Don Hammer. Another milestone episode in your rib-cracking comedy. Professor John Bull.
Be a bird for me. Fly to Mali with like a kilo, what you would call like 2.2 pounds of powder.
And showing at 8:30 p.m. every Tuesday and Friday on NTA Network International and Star Times.
Over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
Welcome to the new speed of life.
Okay, sir. You may now go in for your interview.
Thank you.
my shoe. And to think I just bought this very expensive foreign shoe 2 months ago.
So sorry about your shoes. This is why I advise my friends to always patronize made in Nigeria products. See this shoe. It's made in Nigeria and I've had it for 2 years and it's still as good as the day I bought it.
Made in Nigeria products are good quality, and stringent government regulations and certification now mean that goods made in Nigeria meet international standards. Make the patriotic choice today. Buy right. Buy Made in Nigeria.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
All right, our topic for this morning is actually accessible mortgage, affordable housing. And of course, it's a big one that every Nigerian worker wants to talk about. It's been estimated by the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria that Nigeria needs at least 56 trillion naira to develop a minimum of 720,000 housing units annually in the next 20 years, of course, to meet its housing needs. But consequently, experts in the Nigerian housing finance have argued that provision of housing for most of the income groups in Nigeria depends on the availability of capital, particularly long-term loans at reasonable interest rates. Timothy Yusuf tells us more in this background report, of course, that will set the tone for our discussion this morning.
The provision of finance for the development of houses to meet the nation's housing needs requires a viable mortgage system in which savings and deposits are mobilized and such funds are applied to create loans on mortgages for the purpose of home ownership without administrative and legal encumbrances. To this end, many are asking whether or not there is any significant progress in mortgage financing in Nigeria in the past 5.5 decades. Are there constraints to mortgage financing in Nigeria? How can poverty alleviation be achieved in Nigeria through mortgage financing? What is the way forward? Nigeria is the most populous country in sub-Saharan Africa with a population of over 170 million people. Experts argue that the nation's faster economic growth is raising income levels of our citizens, which in turn allows government to earn more tax revenues and take on redistributive measures. Thus, increased access to affordable mortgage finance for housing development is an imperative and expected to lead to increased employment in the building construction sector of the economy and consequently economic growth. Availability of credit and savings facilities could also help low and middle income earners own their own homes, judging from the fact that inadequate accommodation is one of the major socio-economic problems facing Nigeria for several decades now. The policy objective of the federal government of Nigeria over the years has been the provision of housing to all classes of Nigerian citizens, but its efforts are still nipped in the bud despite the various housing programs embarked upon by it and other tiers of government in the country. Over the years, the housing situation in the country has been so serious with its associated problems such as high occupancy rate, difficulty in acquiring land, organic growth of slums, spiraling rents compared to the tenants' wages levels, and large household size, among others. Meanwhile, the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria is the sole secondary mortgage institution in the country. However, years after the enactment of the act establishing it, the FMBN is hindered by so many factors, topped by liquidity, interest rate, Land Use Act, and non-compliance with the National Housing Fund Act by some state governments for achieving its objectives.
Thank you very much there, Timothy Yusuf, for that background report. Now we have guests with us here in the Abuja studios to discuss this subject matter. First, I would like to welcome Mr. Charles Ajiva. He is Executive Director in charge of loans at the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria. Mr. Ajiva, a pleasure to have you join us on the program.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then we also have with us here in the studios Dr. Chi Akpoji, who is Executive Director, Policy, Strategy and Partnership of the Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company. Dr. Akpoji, a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And also joining us in this discussion this morning is Hassan Musa Usman. He's a former Managing Director, ASO Savings, and of course a Managing Director, New Frontiers Development. That is in Lagos, and he'll join us. He'll join us in Abuja. Sorry, joining us here in the studio. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. All right, so let's begin this conversation, by backing up a bit and then trying to have some understanding of why Nigeria continues to grapple with this apparently huge housing deficit. We know that our population has also been growing. There are all kinds of estimates, sometimes exaggerated figures of 180 million. Some will tell you 117 million Nigerians. But over the decades, if we were to go back even to the First Republic, you had housing corporations that were established by the regional governments. And then you came on to the Second Republic, you also had all kinds of issues pertaining to housing programs announced by the various governments, whether UPN or MPN as it was, as it were at that time. And on, and up to this moment, again, we have all kinds of estimates telling us that we have a housing deficit of 17 billion. But the reality is that Nigerians, for the most part, particularly those in the lower and middle income brackets, are in continuous search of affordable housing of their own, and it appears that, according to them, the mortgage system has failed. What, in your opinion, is responsible for this gap between, the demand for affordable housing and the provision of affordable housing? Let's begin with the former managing director of ASO Service, that's Hassan Musa Usman.
Well, thank you very much. There are a lot of problems really that have bedeviled the industry. You can categorize them very broadly, I think, into about 3 areas. First of all, clearly there's a problem of structural rigidities in the system, by which I mean the land law that we have, the planning approval processes, the process for transferring properties, etc. That's one big area. Secondly is the function of financing. There's not been enough funding into the industry. By funding, I mean availability of long-term capital to enable the one, provision of houses, and then secondly, mortgages to be developed for people who want to buy houses. Thirdly, I think as a nation in general, over the years we've not prioritized housing as a major area that requires development. The will has not been there to push the housing agenda. For me, those 3 things are critical. Without the funding, long-term funding, without the structural rigidities, and without, more importantly, the will to drive housing as a national priority, we can't achieve our objectives.
All right, thanks a lot. Charles Unyo Ajiva, Federal Mortgage Bank. That's one of the reasons why the MBN was established. And still, we have these challenges already identified by Hassan Usman. What is your take on the issues pertaining to affordable and available housing?
Well, like the commentator, one of the commentators has said, there are a number of challenges, like he rightly said. We are intervening in the area of financing. And over the years, the bank has tried its best within the constraints of the finances available, the resources available to the bank. But certainly, the bank can do more if we have more resources, available to at the disposal of the bank.
All right, thank you very much, Charles Nyoajiva. But then let's talk to Dr. Chi Akboji. You're of the refinancing, Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company, and one of the things that Hassan Musa just said now is the issue of financing. That's a huge, huge problem. That's a gap. But what is happening?
Yeah, let me just explain what we do, refinancing. We actually refinance mortgages created in order to provide mortgage banks with the liquidity to now create new mortgages. So NMRC was basically set up to address this whole issue of lack of access to long-term and affordable financing, for mortgages, especially by the mortgage banks. Mortgages are offered by mortgage banks. So one of the constraints, mitigating against the efficient operations of mortgage banks was identified as lack of access to long-term and affordable finance. So essentially, NMRC was created to try to address that gap. So we raise funds from the domestic as well as the foreign capital markets, to provide liquidity to the mortgage banks to enable them now create new mortgages. They bring the mortgage portfolios to us. We pre-qualify them, we review them, the portfolios. We go to the capital market to raise these funds. We buy off those mortgages off them, providing them with the liquidity to create new mortgages. So NMRC is essentially a catalytic facility, enabling the creation of new mortgages. And by enabling the creation of new mortgages, we enable people to now, access their dream of home ownership. Home ownership, as you know, is the ultimate dream of everybody. Everybody wants to own a home. That's the ultimate. So NMRC is basically positioned to enable the achievement or the realization of that dream.
So in other words, are you saying that we don't have a very viable housing finance system in Nigeria?
That's precisely what NMRC is set to address. Okay. Where the mortgage industry, to quote some statistics, mortgage penetration in Nigeria has been put at anywhere from 0.3% to 0.6% of GDP, which is a stark contrast to what obtains in other economies of the world, especially emerging economies like India, where it's about 33%, South Africa, around the same 30-something percent. Even in Ghana, just next door, is about 2% of GDP. In Nigeria, it's still less than 1%. So it's still very much a sector that's very much in its nascent, it's in its ascendancy. So NMRC was basically set up to try to address the key issue of lack of access to long-term funding, long-term finance, which you mentioned, providing the liquidity to our mortgage banks, member mortgage banks, enabling them to now refinance or create new mortgages.
But then with the deficits in terms of housing that we're having, do you think it's the refinancing system is doing well?
It's doing well, as you rightly noted in your introduction. We were set up 3 years ago, so we're very much a new company. We were incorporated on 24th of June 2013. We got our final operating license from the CBN on the 18th of February 2015. So we're still, very new. As I said, our modus operandi is to go to the capital market, raise funds, buy off mortgages from the mortgage banks, providing them with the liquidity to create more mortgages, and by so doing, promoting access to home ownership. So we're still new. We've issued our first bond. We issued our first bond in 2015. We went to the capital market, raised the funds up to 8 billion naira, which we used to refinance mortgages of our member mortgage banks, creating new mortgages in the process. So we're still very much in the process.
Dr. Akpoju, we'll come to some of the final details of the operation of the mortgage refinance bank, as well as the impact on the persons, mortgagees, who are accessing the facilities from the mortgage institutions. But there's something that I would like us to discuss, namely, we know that mortgages are available for secure credit transaction for all kinds of facilities for those who are in business. But we're discussing mortgage in this sense with regard to home ownership. And I'm wondering, Hassan Usman, is it the case that mortgage as a concept, a legal concept or a transactional concept, isn't one that is a good fit for our kind of economy?
No, I don't say that at all. I think it's very much applicable in Nigeria. I mean, you have mortgages in Kenya, you have them in Tanzania, you have them in Uganda and so on. No reason why it can't work in Nigeria. I think we have issues that we've not addressed frontally. We must have a very clear system where you can transfer land ownership, without all kinds of impediments. We must also have a system whereby those transfers are done at fairly affordable rates. The rates that we have right now are fairly exorbitant, if you ask me. Also, in addition, I think we've not done enough in terms of developing or designing affordable houses. If you look at the standard construct of houses around the country, there's a lot of wastage. So in terms of design, in terms of building materials and so on, we have gone for things which are not very functional. There's no reason why we can't, for instance, reduce house sizes and have them a lot more functional using some more affordable materials, whether it's bricks and so on and so forth. So it's not that it's not applicable in Nigeria. Nigeria is very, very ripe for mortgages. Unfortunately, at the moment, that takeoff is impossible. You can't have a situation where you have a functional mortgage industry where people are borrowing at 20% plus. We have to address those issues of interest rates. But of course, the rates cannot come down until and unless the government's own rates come down. So I don't see, I think they're very critical building blocks. I don't see the takeoff of the industry maybe for another 1 year, 18 months or thereabouts, but there's a very bright future if you ask me. There's a big pool of people that require houses in Nigeria. They are willing to do mortgages, they are practiced enough, they're disciplined enough, but until we sort out our inflationary issues and the macroeconomic issues, which would bring down interest rates, we'll not see a very significant takeoff in the industry.
Well, thanks. I mean, again, Hassan, as always, you've talked about a range of issues that obviously have a negative impact on the mortgage institution in this country. If you recall, a little over 20 years ago, almost 25 years ago, by the way, before the June 12 political crisis, threw a spanner into the economy as one of the consequences, there were PMIs, the so-called primary mortgage institutions, which crept up as a result of the launch of the National Housing Fund. But obviously, as you said, the mismanagement of the macroeconomic situation didn't quite help. And people are asking the question, what are the conditions for a viable mortgage institution or a mortgage environment in an economy? Do we have that? Are we in a position to create it? That's the question I'm asking. Back again to Hassan.
I think we are. I think we're very much in a position to create the mortgage industry. And it's not a coincidence. I think it started off about maybe 10 years ago or so, 2005, 2007, when the government sold houses in Abuja. That was a very good basis for the takeoff. People got mortgages, but unfortunately we did not sustain that momentum. But I think right now we have a fresh opportunity. I think with the concerted efforts on the part of government at all levels, at the federal government level, the state government levels, we can do certain things. One is we can reduce the expenses incurred in doing transfers of land, of home ownerships, when you buy and sell houses, I beg your pardon. Secondly is we must make lands available that have valid title. Nobody is in the right sense going to go and create a mortgage where the houses that are being built on lands that do not have valid certificates of occupancy. So we've got to ease through that process, make it a bit easier for series of votes to be issued. Thirdly, we have to have in place a stable macroeconomic environment. Fortunately, we're on course with that. We've seen inflation beginning to come down and so on. We have to be able to sustain those things. I think with those three things, then coupled with better designs of houses, where we have more functional houses, we have a lot more affordable houses being developed. With those four things in place, I think the industry can take off. The building blocks are there. The Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company is in existence. It's there to be able to refinance mortgage banks and commercial banks as well that are able to create mortgages. But people won't create those mortgages unless they know people can afford to pay for those mortgages. So we've got to sort out the issues of the land tenure system, the issues of the interest rates, and the issues of consent. I think if we do those things and we have the requisite political will, and given the fact that we're in a situation right now where the country requires some kind of a stimulus, the housing sector can provide the stimulus required, which will get the mortgage industry to take off and which will enable us to get our people back onto jobs. So I'm very, very optimistic. It's a question of timing. I don't see it happening immediately, but I think over the medium term, about 18 months plus or thereabouts, we will see changes begin to manifest themselves in the industry.
All right, Hassan, thanks a lot. We'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. Charles Abuja, Executive Director of Loans, Federal Mortgage Bank. What are the factors you consider in approving mortgage facilities for applicants?
We look at the income profile of the applicant, because whatever mortgage an applicant is assessing, one of the primary factors is that it should be able to pay back. So the income profile of the applicant is very, very key. Then we also look at the property itself, whether there are valid titles underlying the property, because we cannot create any mortgage on a property without valid title. So these are the key factors that really we consider in granting a mortgage. The applicant should have the ability to pay back, And the underlying asset, which is the mortgage, should have valid title.
Well, I'd like to know, are you giving out loans right now?
Yeah, we are.
Right
we
now,
never stopped giving out
loans
mortgages.
are still being given out. Okay.
Yes, we are.
But then if you ask many Nigerians who are participants of the NHF fund, they'll tell you they have not, civil servants, they have not benefited from it. So why is this?
Well, of course, it's not every worker that has benefited, but a number of workers have benefited.
So what qualifies me as a low-income earner to access this loan?
Yeah, you have to be a contributor to the National Housing Fund for a minimum of 6 months. That's the qualification. And then you have to secure a property that you intend to purchase. So thereafter, you approach a primary mortgage bank that will profile, your application. And if you are qualified, take into consideration some of the factors that I've mentioned, they will forward the applications to Federal Mortgage Bank, to finance.
Well, let's, Dr. Akpoji, in the minds of some Nigerians who attempted, to secure a mortgage, for home ownership, some of the experience has not been quite pleasant. And I'm sure that shortly we'll have, a vox pop, listening to the comments of some Nigerians. They meet with a great deal of frustration. Some of them do not even understand, the intricacies of a mortgage. So exactly where I went, that's why I asked the question earlier, to which Hassan Usman responded, to say, look, is a mortgage system, is it a good fit for our economic relations in this country? Or we are just grappling with concepts that we have very little understanding of? Because if you're talking about, look, how you transfer interest validly in land to another entity, having your CFO and so on and so forth, having governments have a conception of social housing, providing the right requisite financing for long-term onward lending, and so on and so forth. And we are not getting all of this mixed right. Do we have a proper understanding of what mortgages are with regard to acquiring, personal homes?
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. I would like to totally agree with Mr. Hassan that mortgage is a necessary, function operation within our economy here, because we do need to tap into the benefits of a mortgage system. As you also rightly mentioned, there are a number of structural barriers mitigating against the growth or development of the sector within our economy. The difficult macroeconomic environment within which we operate, as you know, is still very much, a very difficult environment within which we operate, characterized by, the issues you raised, the land issues, the high interest rates, and so on. But we are working, even not just the private sector, even the government is working to address those issues in order to really harness, the positive and multiplier effects of having an efficient mortgage system in place, apart from on the individual level of being able to, realize your dream of home ownership. There's issue of job creation, wealth creation, and so on. On our own part in NMRC, part of our role is actually to help break down those barriers in order to provide liquidity, accessibility, stability to the market, to the housing market in Nigeria. Our vision is to become the dominant housing partner in Nigeria. And we've come up with a number of products to try to address some of these structural barriers that we face. For example, on the issue of land, we adopt a value chain approach to whatever we do. We just don't wait for mortgages to come for us for refinancing. We actually go all the way back to the start of the housing value chain, from the land and titling issues to the mortgage, origination administration issues, and then finally to refinancing. We're also even looking beyond refinancing to securitization of mortgage as we have in more advanced mortgage markets. But some of the products we've developed, for example, to address the whole issue of, very high, not only interest rates, property charges, the long time it takes to even get your CFO, the taxes you have to pay to get, even the whole idea of access to land. We've come up with a model mortgage on foreclosure law, where we work with state governments to try to institute an enabling environment that will encourage the creation of mortgages and encourage investors to come and invest in the housing sector in those states. You know, we've worked a number of times. Some of our states have really come on board. Recently, we signed an MOU with Kaduna State government, you know, to really create that environment that will enable them realize their vision of developing a Millennium Project City, which is where they hope to, through which they hope to provide 20,000 houses to their civil servants. So that is one area, you know, with this, what we've done with this modern mortgage and foreclosure law. Part of what it also does is to address a key gap on the whole issue of mortgage administration and access to CFO, which is the lack of foreclosure mechanism. No investor will want to come and invest in housing in any state if he knows that there's no mechanism for him to recoup his investment in place in case there's a default. So
how do you mean that there's no foreclosure mechanism? That's part of the law of mortgages.
But it's only, in fact, I think it's only in Lagos State that you have some form of a foreclosure mechanism. So part of what that modern mortgage and foreclosure law does is actually to advocate for the institution of a foreclosure mechanism, a non-judicial process that will enable recourse to your, you know, investment in cases where the borrower defaults. So that is another incentive, encouraging investors come and, you know, invest in housing in the state, especially affordable housing. That is one. We also have...
Yeah, sorry, Dr. Akmoji. Yes, I know that you will give you opportunity to speak further to this. Let's talk about an applicant for a mortgage. You know, a potential mortgagee approaches a mortgagor and says, listen, this is what I want, X, Y, Z. First condition listed by the Executive Director of Loans of Federal Mortgage Bank is that you must have a stream of income, you know, that will be assessed to say, okay, this person will do this. Now, let's again look at how our economy operates. I don't have the data, perhaps you might have. What percentage of Nigerians are in formal employment? What percentage of Nigerians are in informal employment? What is the rate of labor mobility, including job losses for those who are in formal employment, so that if a mortgagee gets into default, how do you track, or how do you in the first instance even assess his potential, you know, for paying going forward, you know, paying his mortgages, you know, the monthly basis or whatever arrangement that you have over a 25, 30-year period? We'll come to the tenor subsequently to say, look, will you grant, do we have instances now where you grant 25, 30-year mortgages as you find in advanced countries?
Yes. We have, you've raised two very important issues. The issue of the income stream, which is necessary. Remember, mortgage is a loan. It's a loan that you take. So, of course, you must have some form of income to be able to pay back that loan over a period of time. And, of course, there must be some charge against that loan, whether it's fixed or variable. These are all the common, you know, terms surrounding a mortgage. So you must, it's a loan. So income must be, you know, is a requirement. You must have a stream of income. But the other issue raised is the question of formal and informal.
That's right.
Because in the informal sector, as we all know, is actually a major component of our economy. He estimates about 60% of Nigerian, you know, workforce is in the informal sector.
So we'll and the money record is missing all kinds of things.
Without that, I think that it's extremely important that we incorporate the informal sector into the mainstream sector in terms of providing mortgages and so on. If I was to hazard a guess, I'll probably say that for every one person in the formal sector, there are at least about 3 people in the informal sector. So if we're to have a functional and very viable mortgage sector, we must incorporate the informal sector. Now, we have to also balance certain demands. On the one hand, we have the demand of people who want to have houses who are in the informal sector. On the other hand, we also have the fears, legitimate fears, of those who are investors, who are providing the money that's required to provide the mortgages. And somewhere along the line, we have to have a balance. They want to have security that if they provide their funding, their funds will come back to them eventually. I think we need to have a more systematic process whereby we encourage people in the informal sector to bank their proceeds, because the bank will require some sort of cash flow before they can advance you a loan. So whatever proceeds you have from doing your businesses, bank them on a regular basis into your account. From that account, the banker can see that you have a stable source of income. You have maybe income flows over the last 6 months, based on which they can estimate, roughly speaking, if you're to get a mortgage, you can afford to pay X% of it towards retiring the mortgage. I think that's very important. Secondly is the issue of, which is very commendable, the issue of the BVN that's now in place. With the biometrics that we have right now, it's very difficult for you to just simply abscond when you get a mortgage. So that has significantly reduced the risk involved in, say, lending onto the informal sector. I think another area where we as an industry, the mortgage industry and real estate, haven't done a very good job is in educating the public. And I don't mean it in any kind of derogatory way. People need to have very clear information regarding what the requirements are for a mortgage. How do I apply? Where do I apply? What do I need to do? What is my payment structure? How long will I pay? What is the effective rate that I'm paying when I get a loan? That has not been done. I think it requires a concerted approach on the part of the industry, as well as a central bank as well. So I think with a campaign where people are educated a lot more with regards to what the requirements are, we'll see a lot less dissatisfaction. But clearly the sort of comments that people have made with regards to their obvious frustration and so on, I can relate to it. I mean, when I was working in the bank, I saw a lot of that happening. And unfortunately, we haven't done a good job in terms of providing education with regards to saying this is the process. If you do A, B, C, D, you can reasonably expect you will get a mortgage. So that education process, I think, is extremely important.
You just said now that you could relate with the frustration of some of the Nigerians, the Vox Pops that you just watched now. You are former managing director of ASO Savings. You've got a lot of experience in that area. Could you share with us some of your experiences? Where people are actually able, through your organization, then that's ASO, were they able to access the National Housing Fund? What's the percentage of people that were able to?
Well, it's a very small percentage, and it's not the fault of the Federal Mortgage Bank. I don't think so. I think there's a fundamental problem itself with the NHF as a concept, and I've always said so. We have contributions coming through from the vast majority of those who are in paid employment. More than 3/4 of those who contribute to that fund will never access it, for no fault of theirs. It's just simply the quantum of funding in there is not sufficient. We're asking people to provide 2.5% of their incomes into a pool of funding. The average cost of houses is probably 5 million naira plus or thereabouts. So by the time you're actually taking 5 million naira and you're spreading it across maybe 10,000 people or something, you're probably exhausted what NHF is able to get within a year. And you have about 3 million people who are actually contributing, or in the workforce who are contributing. So we have to go back and reform that concept. Do we want to continue with the NHF? In my opinion, it should become a sort of social mortgage scheme where we're working on maybe the lowest end of the market. Those who are really distressed and cannot afford it can come through the NHF mechanism. And then those who are a bit more affluent, who are working, who are maybe in higher salaries and so on, can go through the normal market mechanism, but the market mechanism which will have some kind of government support so that the rates can come in a bit lower. But honestly, the way NHF is constructed right now, through the legislation, for no fault of FMBN or even the contributors, it cannot be successful. If you have 3 million people contributing into a fund and only about 10, 30,000 can benefit from it on a yearly basis, it is impossible to meet the requirements. So I think it requires a fundamental review. The NHF is long overdue for a reform.
All right. Well, Hassan, thanks a lot. But just before we leave you, let's make this aspect, and then we'll get the comments of the other two guests with us. You talked about extending the frontiers of education of members of the public with regard to the requirements of the operation of a mortgage system. And that takes me back to the question I asked, whether the mortgage system is a good fit for us. I'm asking this question against the background of what you find, again, in advanced economies. I mean, if you were to talk to Nigerians here about your credit score, somebody's going to be asking you, what exactly do you mean? Most Nigerians will be asking you, what is a credit score? Because we run, as it were, a debit economy. Elsewhere, they run a credit economy. Now, growing up, by the time a gentleman or a lady is out of university and you start work, you're thinking of getting a home of your own, you understand that you have a fair sense of what a mortgage is, how to proceed with that. So if we are going to get on the educational ramp of this aspect, what exactly are we going to be looking at? Are we seeking to break down our socio-cultural barriers that hinder perhaps a clear understanding of what mortgages are?
Well, I think so, yeah. It includes that, almost certainly. I think there's a sociocultural aversion towards debt, generally speaking. I think a lot of us just simply, people do not want to take any kind of loan. Yeah, we don't want any kind of debt at all. Debt is not necessarily a bad thing. If somebody is in paid employment or has a regular income and wants to buy or build a house and can't afford to do so upfront, but has enough of his or her income to be able to afford to pay over 15 years, debt is a very viable way to go about acquiring that property. So I think we need to, first of all, begin to even introduce that, make it acceptable, beg your pardon, that you can actually borrow to buy or to build a house. Secondly, is just to even explain the concepts. And I don't think it's a very difficult thing. I think if we as a country could very easily get onto the technology revolution and get involved into ICT, into the mobile phone revolution, we're texting, we're banking through the phone, etc., etc., there's no reason at all why we cannot do a similar thing with the mortgage industry. I go back many, many years, 30, 40 years ago, so in the early 70s up until maybe early 80s, people were taking on mortgages. They were not that popular. People were taking on mortgages through Nigerian Building Society and through Federal Savings Bank and so on and so forth. They were getting loans and they were paying back regularly because the environment there was fairly stable, even though the demand for mortgages at that time was not very high. I think there has to be a conscious effort on the part of the industry and the central bank as well to break it down and explain to the public that you can borrow if you want to buy a house. Here's the way in which you borrow. When you borrow, here's what you expect from the bank. If there are gaps in terms of what the bank does, or if you feel cheated in any way by the bank, here are the remedies. Yeah? And the central bank has a very strong consumer protection function. So that can come into play in the educational process, in assuring people that if you take in a mortgage and you follow the required processes and something goes wrong along the way, central bank is standing in there, will make sure that whatever things that have happened that are wrong can be remedied. But that educational process for me is very important. And I'm very happy to see that something's been done along those lines. I'm aware there's a World Bank facility which has been obtained in conjunction with the central bank, and where part of the monies that are going to come through that will be devoted towards educating the public on the demands of a mortgage and how to go about getting a mortgage.
All right, thank you very much, Hassan Musa Usman. Let's get very quickly the comments of Dr. Chi Akpoji on this aspect with regard to popularizing the mortgage system and therefore getting people to understand the mechanics of it all.
Yeah, I totally endorse this. I mean, as you rightly mentioned, even as seen from the Vox Pop that you heard here, part of the issues, part of the challenges actually lack of in-depth knowledge of what the mortgage is all about, and there are efforts at risk of sounding, like a broken record on this issue. We are making efforts to really address this whole issue of the knowledge gap within the sector, about the sector amongst the Nigerian populace. There is an ongoing effort at developing a mortgage literacy program with the central bank as well as the primary mortgage banks themselves, to really educate the general public on really how to access a mortgage in an effort to really not only grow the industry, but hopefully alleviate some of the concerns and challenges that potential borrowers face in going to a mortgage bank. You know, their expectations, their roles and responsibilities, especially their responsibilities as well. So that when you hear your need for the collateral, you know that this is something that you're supposed to bring as part of the application process for a mortgage. So it won't sound strange to you again. You know what I mean, you know? And then also your rights as a borrower, you know, and also the ability to be able to shop around. Actually, in the final analysis, you want to get to a stage where people can be able to walk to any mortgage banks armed with, equipped with knowledge of what they want and say, look, I want this amount of mortgage. I've identified a house I want to purchase. I want this amount of mortgage. This is how much I think I should be able to repay every month. And then be able to negotiate very well with the mortgage institution and come out satisfied that, look, yes, I've gotten the best deal I can out of my interaction with this mortgage. So that education is really key. And as I said, there are efforts to really make sure, embark on that mortgage literacy campaign to really bring more people within the mortgage fold, in addition to educate Nigerians.
All right, Dr. Chiakboji, thank you very much for that. But then I'd like to get back to you shortly. That's after we take our tweets on the question that my colleague Kingsley asked earlier, why we're finding it difficult for institutions to give out long-term loans. Do we still have people giving out 30, 20 years, you know, as a loan from institutions? But then first, let's take a comments from our viewers who are tweeting at NTA GMN. You can continue to be a part of the discussion. Keep sending in your tweets. But let's take the ones we have right now. The first one is from Dele Solomon. He says, presently in the country, accessing funds to build houses is very difficult due to the near absence of a functional mortgage sector.
Abdullahi Onishabi tweets, many civil servants have been contributing to the scheme, that's the National Housing Fund, without deriving any benefit. What a hopeless program. It is unfair.
Mohammed Jamil tweets, this is the right time to raise the sector from the slum. Fashola should use our mortgage for some of the projects and made to flourish well.
And this is from Global Times. Interesting topic, but the reality is that mortgage is not accessible nor affordable housing. The reasons are not far-fetched, although he doesn't indicate what the reasons are.
And this one is from Amiyu Inuwa. It says, Kingsley, the question that often perplexes us is, what of those that have no mortgage card yet their money is being deducted?
And Stanley Buba tweets, does Nigeria have a mortgage policy? The answer is yes. Now, in Morocco, the policy is graded for the rich and poor, for the formal and informal sectors.
And Inusa Adamu tweets, we contributors want to withdraw our participants. How should I withdraw?
Okay. so that's a pertinent question.
Yeah.
Yes, you know, who is the custodian of the funds? That's assuming you want a refund of all the contributions that you have made. So you can go and buy your own cement, iron rod, granite, and sharp sand, and then employ your own laborers. But the late Jack Solomon has another tweet. Now, for the mortgage idea to appeal to more Nigerians, the authorities should provide softer loans, reduce the bottlenecks in mortgage acquisition.
And Mohammed Jami tweets, mortgage thrives very well in the past. The sector suffered the consequences of bad leadership. I know of many low-cost buildings till date. And those are the tweets that we're taking right now, Kingsley.
That's right, that's right. So let's return to our guest, and then the Executive Director of, the Executive Director of the Federal Mortgage Bank. One issue that I'm sure we're all aware of. You go around major cities in the country today. We're here in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, in Lagos, in Port Harcourt and elsewhere. You find that despite the complaints about shortage of housing, the skylines of these cities, the skyline has changed in every respect over the past 2 decades, particularly in the past 10 years. You've seen, new structures coming up, but unfortunately, I mean, if you were to approach the developers, the amounts they will quote for you would be, of course, scary. And in some cases, when they offer any facility, any mortgage facility, you are told to pay tens of millions of naira, not more than 24 months. That's 2 years. In some cases, 6 months. I'll give you one example. After the 2003 All Africa Games, you know the Games Village by the stadium in Abuja, there was a lottery for persons to indicate their interest and a bid for those houses. And the timelines stipulated for payment, not more than 90 days. That's even by government. So, back to the issue. Persons or people are complaining that we hear of all kinds of monies being given for mortgage refinance to primary mortgages, X, Y, Z, but that these monies go to developers, private developers, who have now become, as it were, the ultimate beneficiaries rather than the mortgagees, whether low income or medium income or lower end. What is happening?
Well, let me start by saying that to actually increase home ownership, mortgage is the right way to go. And dare say that is the only way to go.
That is in theory.
Not in theory, because only in few, maybe developing and undeveloped countries that you see people bringing out cash to buy a house. Elsewhere, you go through mortgage. And going through mortgage enables anybody that has a source or stream of income, like we said, to actually access a house. So there's no doubt that mortgage is the only way to go if we want to increase home ownership in this country. And on the issue of, having skyscrapers in the country, luxurious houses, that is true in most cities. And we have observed that those houses are not meant for the middle and low income earners. And our mandate at Federal Mortgage Bank is to improve and increase accessibility to affordable housing. So what the bank has done over time is to intervene in the supply side, working with developers to ensure that we have houses that are at affordable, prices that both middle and low income earners can access. And even in the city of Abuja, we have a number of those estates spread across the FCT and several other states, in the country. So, and our emphasis is actually on the middle and low income earners. So we are, emphasizing that, working with the developers to make sure that we deliver affordable houses that can be accessible to
how much
to
do these houses cost?
On the average?
On the average.
On average, between 6 and 7 million.
Okay.
Depending on the city.
What is the tenor of the mortgage?
The mortgage we
for such houses, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's the mortgage we provide, which covers those houses up to 30 years, depending on your age and the period you have left in service. You can get up to 30 years mortgage.
No, whose service? I mean, isn't this whose service? For a civil servant or for somebody who's working in a private enterprise?
We like Adi said, our mortgages are meant for contributors to the National Housing Fund.
Who are mainly civil servants?
No. We have improved, you see, like you did ask before, what we are doing for the informal sector. We have introduced a product for the informal sector. And what we have done is to encourage the informal sector to come into cooperatives. So by that, they will be contributing to the National Housing Fund, and it's easier for us to manage. The cooperative societies, act as a check on their members. So it gives us comfort. So we have a product for informal sector that we can avail them mortgages.
Sorry, let's clarify this again, Executive Director. If you're a civil servant, 60 years or 35 years, right?
Yes.
Now, if you work in a private sector, an established entity,
yes,
there is no limit as to how many years you can work. So I'm asking, would you be considering how many years a private sector employee has left in service when there is no limitation as to how many years he or she can be employed?
In that case, we work on the 60 years, which is the retirement, age for public servants.
I'm saying private sector. I'm not talking about public sector.
I said we apply the rule since there's no cap.
Yeah.
So we apply,
you apply the
cap that is applicable to the public
sector. Dr. Akpoju, let's get your comments on some of these issues. particularly the point that Charles Ajiba hasn't quite addressed, namely the concern by members of the public who see all of these exotic houses, in the cities, and we hear about mortgage money, financing, and so on and so forth, and they are driving past every time, and they themselves are living in hovels.
And funny enough, some of these houses are unoccupied.
I know, yeah.
They are unoccupied, especially in the city of Abuja, most of them.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about some of the structural constraints within the sector, and that one of the major constraints is the, lack of, affordable housing supply, and it's quite. It's a challenge, and there are efforts also ongoing to address it. As you rightly said, as you drive around Abuja, you see so many luxury homes, totally unaffordable to the ordinary Nigerian and still empty. But I think developers are mainly in the business to make money. That's one thing we must realize that, and that's probably why they build for the people who can afford those houses. But they've also realized now that in order to really achieve economies of scale and get the bang for their buck, they really need to address, the middle to lower income people and begin to build houses that are more affordable to the average Nigerians. It's ongoing. There are, if you are around, you see quite a number of estates with affordable housing. And we at NMRs, we're also working indirectly with developers to encourage them, because part of the problem they have is lack of access to construction finance. That's a major constraint as well. Whatever finance is available to them, it comes at a very high cost. So part of the reason why we position ourselves as, a lender is also to, as we provide liquidity to the mortgage banks are also able to interface with the developers to pay them off so that developers can now also deliver more affordable housing. So it's a win-win situation all around. The mortgage banks are able...
Win-win for whom?
For both the mortgage banks as well as the developer.
Yeah, so that's not... What about the mortgagee?
The mortgagee is now enabled to, to buy a house that is more affordable within his own income bracket that he can afford.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Akwaja. Let's invite Hassan back into this conversation. The perception is that, as typical, of rent-seeking behavior that we find around in the economy with all kinds of macroeconomic challenges, that the developers, and the primary mortgage institutions are the fat cats in this economy, while ordinarily the end beneficiaries, that's to say the mortgagees, are left high and dry and, left to languish in their slums. How do we redress this? Where you see all kinds of, beautiful homes and yet unaffordable, to the low and medium, the majority of new home seekers?
But I think you're right. The developers definitely want to make as much money as they can, and that's what they do. But I think it's incumbent upon government to work to make sure that those at the lower end of society actually have access to decent houses. And certain things can happen. I mean, I would expect a more holistic approach. I think on the one hand, as I mentioned earlier, there has to be concerted effort, both by the federal and the state governments, to make sure that the consent, that the land is available, that has title, that the process for consenting to transfers is made much easier, that there's a reform, a wholesale reform of the National Housing Fund so that it can reach out to a much larger number of people, that each state government, just get some stimulus, to get some momentum going, each state government should be encouraged to find land in the state capital or one or two other senatorial zones where they can provide land that is already titled and that's already provided with infrastructure, where you can have, say, 5,000 or 10,000 housing units done. So that way, those areas can be devoted towards providing affordable housing, and the houses can be made affordable and sold to the public. What we have right now, developers are getting lands which are maybe within city centers, which have been developed infrastructure-wise and so on at fairly expensive rates, and developers have bought those lands and they want to recoup their money, and so they factor those costs into their pricing when they're selling houses. It is incumbent upon governments at all levels to make sure that land is available within every city, which is provided with infrastructure, where those affordable houses can be built, and where the government can then come in and say, if we're providing this land to you, and this land has been provided with infrastructure and with title, you cannot sell a house here for more than 5 million or for more than 7.5 million. But it's not going to happen just simply by allowing market forces to work. I think there has to be a strong push on the part of government. And I would say again, governments at all levels, the federal government and the state governments. And I think the most, in my opinion, the most viable way to do so is to get the states and the federal government to work through the National Economic Council to get that as a policy decision, and people can then drive it.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Hassan Musa. We'll take some of the tweets that are coming in right now. The very first one here is from Godswill Awoyo. He says, the procedure for obtaining a mortgage loan is too cumbersome. They collect our money with ease, yet we can't access the loan.
And this is from Cecilia Okoroma. Says, even when the bank, that is Federal Mortgage Bank, does not have funds to give, they will make you pay for charges for loans they will not give. I am a victim. That is Cecilia. And
Festus Akimboyewa says, government should come up with a long-term policy aimed at easing access to mortgage credit by low and middle income earners in Nigeria.
Suleiman Yahaya, the issue of equity contribution is a serious problem for civil servants considering their income. We can use the NHRS model.
Enyo Ayoka tweets, red tape and high interest rates have kept mortgages out of the reach of majority of Nigerians. Transparent reforms are needed.
Another one from Cecilia Okoroma tweets, does it mean that mortgage loans are meant for civil servants alone? What happens to other hardworking Nigerians that are taxpayers?
Otega Esemudu tweets, the mortgage banking in Nigeria should be encouraged by governments. This is a very important. Housing is another way to boost the economy.
And still from Otega Esemudu, it says, accessible mortgage for the common man should be a priority. This is what other emerging economies are doing to better the lives of their citizens.
And Dele Jackson Solomon tweets, 5 drawbacks of mortgage financing are cost, character, capacity, collateral conditions. Mortgage is a basis for a rating development. Those are the tweets that we have right now. You can still tweet at us at NTA GMN. But then I'd like to talk to Mr. Hassan Musa. Mr. Hassan Musa, I love the breakdown that you did earlier, that, you know, for no fault of some people, they might not be able to just access it because the funds are not there. You're actually advocating for a reform of the NHS system. But then, are there new ways that could be employed to inject funds into the system?
Well, by law, and I think there's an act that was passed in 1992, I think, which says that the NHF will be made up of 2.5% of the salaries of every contributor. And so that's the quantum of the funds that we have available. That law would have to be amended. There would have to be some reforms done in order to provide a much bigger quantum of funding. Government on its part, if it wants to, can say, okay, we think this is a priority area and we want to be able to reach out to a much larger mass of people. So in the same way that we have put up, say, 300 billion naira for small and medium-scale enterprises, etc., we want to put up maybe 200 or 300 billion naira for housing, yeah? And then to put that into the National Housing Fund, to have a very clear mechanism for administering those funds, and to say, okay, those funds that have gone into this new revised scheme can be provided at maybe 9% per annum, and people have 15, 20, 25 years to pay for them. That's one way. Now, but of course, given the fiscal situation of the government, they may be reluctant to do so because the costs involved are actually quite high. But without some kind of mechanism like that, which provides either subsidized funding or enhances the quantum of funds in that scheme, it'll be impossible to meet the requirements of people. I certainly think that at 6% per annum, this interest rate that you get for the National Housing Fund is an excellent initiative, but it's simply not sustainable. You cannot provide 6% money to people in a very large scale because the funds simply are not there. Government itself is borrowing at 18, 19% or thereabouts. But if it's just for maybe a targeted intervention funding, the government says, okay, for the next 5 or 10 years, we want to enhance the mortgage industry in Nigeria because we can see the very clear benefits. If we have affordable mortgages, we'll have a functional housing system. If we have a functional housing system, we have jobs being created, we have factories producing doors, producing paints, producing all kinds of stuff. So the spin-offs involved for the economy is actually quite large. On that basis, an argument can be made for injecting some intervention funds into a revamped National Housing Fund with a very clear mechanism for administering those funds and for disbursing loans to people. I don't think it can be at 6%. It'll have to be something which is maybe more along what central bank is doing now for the intervention funds, 9 or 12% or thereabouts. But at least you have a much wider quantum of funds available, and you have a much larger number of people who are able to afford or to get such mortgages. But I think without such a reform, it'll be impossible.
All right, Hassan, thanks a lot for that perspective. Earlier, you talked about, you just elaborated on it again now. You talked about one of the challenges that we face with housing in the country, the fact that home construction is not standardized. The home structures are not standardized. We tend to waste spaces and so on and so forth. We've had here on this program the Honorable Minister in charge of Power, Works and Housing, and he's talked about one of his priority areas, the idea of standardizing, the various features that you need, doors, blocks, and so on and so forth. My question goes to Dr. Apoji, which follows from what Hassan just explained. Is it the case that we have tended to isolate housing as a basic social need? I mean, one of the first needs of humanity anyway, yes, to have housing, but that we have not sufficiently factored this into our macroeconomic management, such that we do not see, for instance, how, interest rates, on stable, forex regime, and so on and so forth, impact almost invariably. Job losses. I mean, if you have no job, you have a mortgage, and you're unable to pay you make your monthly payments, there's a foreclosure that comes in. How do we therefore mainstream housing into our macroeconomic management? And by the way, the MPC is running off its meeting today. That's the Monetary Policy Committee meeting, and there are speculations as to what the interest rate might be. So how do we mainstream housing, whether social, formal or informal sector, into our macroeconomic management?
I beg to differ. I believe government has always made the effort to mainstream housing into our macroeconomic, overview as a whole, right from, the start of the creation of the Nigerian Building Society, even with the creation of the Federal Mortgage Bank, and of course the startup of the NMRC. The issue is that, the dynamics of our operating environment, the dynamics of our economy, what I will call the challenges facing an economy that is developing, an emerging economy like ours, often seem to constitute barriers to the growth or proper development, efficient development of the housing sector. But nevertheless, the push is still there. Efforts will continue to be made to ensure the development of an efficient and sustainable housing sector. If not for anything, but for the fact that it is the one recognized avenue to job creation, to wealth creation, to an enhanced sense of citizenship and a sense of well-being within any community. So the effort will still be there, despite the challenges within the macroeconomic operating environment. And some of the challenges being faced by the stakeholders within the housing sector, from the developers themselves with access or lack thereof to cheap construction finance, and then the whole issue of infrastructure. Part of the high cost you'll find in some of those houses is due to infrastructure, so which is about 30% of the cost of construction, which is some area we need to address. Then there's a challenge of high interest rate faced by the borrower. How do we mitigate that? You mentioned about the monetary policy, and we're waiting to see what the outcome of the meeting will be.
Sorry, Dr. Apoji, let's not make this, an argument as to whether or not the macroeconomic environment has been sufficiently managed, not just now, but over the years, to ensure that housing is sufficiently mainstream. If you look at the key components for delivering housing, whether exotic or affordable, and then you say, look, where do this come from? What are our trade policies with regard to the key components you need? What are the fiscal policies that you need? What is the tax regime that you need? I mean, if you are at the federal level, what kind of taxes are you subjected to? You go to the state level, what kind of taxes are you subjected to? These are the issues I'm talking about. That yes, it is true that we've talked about housing. We've talked about the housing corporations that you had in the First Republic. You talked about housing that you had, as an MPN project in the Second Republic, and then even under the military regimes. But the fact that the deficit continues, and the fact also that you still have shacks, in most parts of the country, would tend to lend credence to that. But let's take our next set of tweets.
All right, but just before we take our next set of tweets, I'd like to ask Charles Ajiva, Executive Director of Loans and Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, do you have could you give us a figure as to a number of people who have been able to access loan in this short while? Through the National Housing Fund.
Contributors to the National
Yes, contributors.
Housing Fund.
How many of them have been able to access
Okay. Before I answer that, we have several windows of facilities that we intervene in the housing sector. We have the window for developers, which is a construction site. We grant them facilities at concessionary rates of 10% to develop affordable housing. So we have that window. Then we have the window for the National Housing Fund loan, which is the mortgage site. As we speak, we have granted over 17,000 mortgages, running at about 60 billion.
Over how many years?
Well, you see the history of the Federal Mortgage Bank, started from 1956 at the Nigerian Building Society, has some punctuations. So the Federal Mortgage Bank, and under the NHF that we're operating now, just started with the NHF Act of 1992, which commenced implementation in 1993. So we say effectively, what we're talking about is from 1993.
To date.
Because at the point...
So that's on the average, in 24 years, nearly a quarter century, you've advanced mortgages for 17,000 persons. 17,000.
Yes.
All right. And then yet, private developers that you extend facility to, you give them concessionary rate, and that's where the devil is in the detail we talked about.
Yes.
That these developers, now, do you then monitor, their own lending or own sale, final sale to mortgagees or outright buyers and the tenor that they give to these persons?
We determine the prices when we advance construction loan to a developer. We determine the prices, as well as who to sell to, because you will not sell to non-contributors to the National Housing Fund.
How do you determine who to sell to?
Who they will sell to?
No, because the sale is done through Federal Mortgage Bank.
Okay.
Yes.
How do you shortlist those who qualify for purchase?
No, all the interested buyers go to a primary mortgage bank, like I did say at the beginning, who will now package the loan and forward
That's where they were
us.
talking about the frustrations that they encounter. Bank with us, say with us. Let's take some of the tweets that will further reflect some of the issues that our viewers have also touched on. Annie.com tweets, isn't it possible to waive the initial equity contribution, especially in the case of civil servants who have steady incomes, so the repayments can be taken from their monthly salaries over time?
Judge Wilawayo tweets, please ask how I can stop them from deducting my salary and methods which through I can recoup the much they have deducted.
Okay, we have John. We have this from John Bitty Young. It says, it's unfortunate that we as civil servants contribute to the housing funds and yet no house after retirement.
Okay, every man, Liania tweets, let's revert to the old system where government builds houses and allocates them to civil servants. We can't afford mortgages in this present form.
And Suleiman Yahaya, it says, why not also use owners occupiers?
And the judge, I will tweet again, please, the person from their office, what are they doing with our money that they have been deducting for years?
All right, another one again from Suleiman Yahaya. It says, most of the houses are more than 7 million. In fact, they are from 15 million and above.
True. And Judge Awal Ayo tweets again, for years they keep telling us that they've not signed an MOU with the government, yet they are deducting from our salaries. Those are the tweets that we're having now. Finally, I'd like to get the final thoughts of Hassan Musa Usman. All right, from your experience, I'd like to also know, some of these mortgage institutions, primarily, are giving out loans or are giving out mortgage, loans. Are they affordable? I'm not talking about the NHS now. Those private mortgage banks who are giving out loans, are they actually affordable?
Well, I think affordability is a function of one's income. And the fact is that the income levels of most people is actually quite low. The fact is that interest rates right now, and have been, I guess, in the industry for the last maybe 5 years plus, have been at least 15%, if not more. Right now, you're probably talking about 20-something% in terms of interest rates. Are those rates affordable? No, except for those who are in the most comfortable of jobs right now, and those who are fairly high earners. Most people can't afford to pay that kind of interest rate. It's an aberration, honestly. I don't think that you can have a functional mortgage industry develop based on 25% plus interest rates. So until we sort out the macroeconomics surrounding that, it'll be difficult to see that take off. But as I said earlier, I remain optimistic. I think there are things that are underway which will certainly address the macroeconomics and hopefully bring down the interest rates so that we can have fairly affordable interest rates. I know for a fact that when NMRC started off, the refinancing was done at about 15% plus or thereabouts, which is relatively high, but I mean, it's something which one can go with, and it's something which I think a lot of people can afford. And then over time, you can see the sort of rates coming down. But until we address the macroeconomics, frankly speaking, we will not get the kind of level of takeoff that we require in the mortgage industry.
But can anything be done about the initial amount you have to pay, especially when you want to access a mortgage? You're going for a house of 10 million naira, you're asked to bring 3 million naira, which of course as a civil servant you don't have.
Yeah, but that's rather high. I think there's an initiative by the government last week or 2 weeks ago or so, where they said they had scrapped the down payment for civil servants, 10% down payment or thereabouts. I think we can say to ourselves, well, look, bring down the down payment. Rather than 30%, maybe it should be 10%, maybe it should be 5%. The important principle is that whoever is buying a house must have some skin in the game. If you want to buy a house, you must have shown over time you've saved something towards acquiring that house. It could be 5%, it could be 10%. I would not recommend not having a down payment at all, frankly. Maybe as a priority right now because we have economic challenges. But if you look at what happened in the US 8-10 years ago, so the subprime crisis, when the underwriting standards were relaxed, people could get mortgages without putting down anything at all, down payment. The numbers exploded, and over time the defaults increased, and people just simply walked away, and the banks suffered significant losses. I would not advocate that. I think we should have some down payment, maybe 5%, but there must be something which indicates that the person that wants to buy a house knows what it takes to buy a house, is prepared to sacrifice and save something, and say, okay, here's my own contribution. Mr. Bank, you lend me 95% or lend me 90%. Here's my 10%.
All right, Hassan, thank you very much. Let's get the closing thoughts of Dr. Akboji. Yes, mortgage is crucial to affordable housing to bridge the deficit. So, are we likely to get this right in the medium to long term?
I believe so. I firmly believe so. I remain optimistic, that we will get it right in the medium to long term. Just want to quickly address some of the issues raised in your tweets. The issue of equity down payment. There are quite a number of initiatives underway to really address that. We've already heard the recent proclamation by government, removing that requirement for mortgages of 5 million naira and below. But there is also a new product that's coming up, being driven by the insurance industry, which is really waking up to its responsibilities as far as mortgage is concerned, called collateral replacement indemnity insurance, which acts as insurance against your payment of that equity. Prior to that, even the federal government had, launched an initiative through PENCOM, enabling access to, I believe it's 25% of your RSAs to be able to make your down payment against the mortgage. So there are...
Yeah, but how do you address the point raised by Hassan with regard to what the world witnessed nearly 10 years ago, the fiasco of the subprime mortgage system in the U.S., which reverberated throughout the world?
Well, that was predicated on the relaxation of the underwriting standards. As you rightly said, a potential borrower must have skin in the game. You must. So that is the only way to ensure that and to enable you to do that. That's why we have all these products coming up, the CRI or the collateral replacement indemnity insurance. There's the, access to your 25% of your RSA. There's also a Sukuk program coming up. NMRC is about to issue the first Sukuk denominated bond.
So this is Dr. Chi Akboji. Again, all of this will take us back to the recommendation for proper enlightenment and education of the populace with regard to all of these issues, the mechanics of a mortgage system. Dr. Chi Akboji, Executive Director in charge of Policy, Strategy and Partnership of the Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company, established just about 3 years ago. We'd like to thank you for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We also would like to thank Mr. Charles Nyo Ajiva, Executive Director in charge of loans at the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria. Mr. Undio Ajiva, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
And as always, Hassan Musa Usman, our delight that you were with us, former Managing Director, Astro Savings Loans, and incumbent Managing Director, New Frontier Development. Thank you for your insight.
It's my pleasure.
All right. So that does it for our discussion segment. Let's quickly take a complimentary segment.